SJ, welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ Stongo, Gary 5 Jaho Jifkados, Mvskoke Radio, Mabu Hedjid Wedskis. Welcome to our program here on this warm and toasty, moldy morning. We appreciate you all being with us today. We have a couple of subjects we'll be discussing that have been real important to our people lately. First of all, the Supreme Court reaffirmed that the Indian Child Welfare Act is valid and has jurisdiction over the placement of Native American kids and supported tribal sovereignty in its way. So we're going to be discussing that with a couple of our tribal program staff members. And in the second half of our program, we'll be speaking with some folks in the Yuchi language program to kind of hear what our cousins there are doing about preserving their language and culture and how they play an important part in overall Mvskoke culture. So we got a couple of busy things lined up for you here today. First of all, we'd like to welcome to our studio Steve Wanning and Brittany Candioto, right? Mm-hmm. I got that one right. Okay. They are staff people with the tribe's Indian Child Welfare Act offices. What's the correct title for that office now?
CFSA, Children and Family Services.
Right. Okay, and your title, Steve?
I am the State Reunification and Permanency Manager.
Oh, that's a handful.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, and Brittany, what's your title?
I am the Certification, Placement, Recruitment, and Training Manager, and that's short for foster care.
Okay, I think we'll go by that, or just toss some initials out there. Now, we know that tribes across the nation are heralding, lauding, and waving their arms in the air about the Supreme Court decision recently that reaffirms that the Indian Child Welfare Act is valid and has jurisdiction in placement of our children and futures. And it's being heralded, I like that word, has one way of underlining tribal sovereignty, in a sense, in this particular idea, but that tribes have jurisdiction over their own people and land and things like that. So first of all, let's get an idea of what the Indian Child Welfare Act really is and what is its mission. Who wants to start with that?
Yeah. The Indian Child Welfare Act is, it was passed by Congress. It's a federal law passed by Congress in 1978. So it's been around for quite some time. And the intent that Congress had at that time, as it's lined out, is to protect the best interests of Indian children and to promote the stability and security of Indian tribes and families. So that's been the argument ever since 1978. But I like what Congress said there whenever they brought that out. It says to protect the best interest of Indian children and their families. So that is, again, that was the intent of Congress back then, and that is with the 7-2 vote by the Supreme Court. That's being reaffirmed. Mm-hmm. And with our office, and I'm sure all tribal nations across the country are very pleased with that decision. And it was as far as the lopsidedness of it, it was a really surprising decision, 7-2. I think that really tells people or other agencies who are trying to pick apart ICWA that ICWA stands strong, and the Supreme Court stands with the Indian Child Welfare Act. So I think that as far as that one-sidedness, that 7-2, really really sent a message to private agencies out there who want to destroy ICWA and find that it's unconstitutional. And now that that's been reaffirmed, that's I think that was a very clear message to those agencies out there.
Now, this decision came out of a court that has really been considered quite conservative and not necessarily a friend, shall we say, to Native American interests and tribal sovereignty in general. But this 7-2, speaks pretty well for itself. Now, the law came about to govern the removal and placement of Indian children from their homes. I mean, in some cases, kids are just taken out of a home for various reasons. Some, valid, I'm sure, but others that somebody decided, well, this kid will have a better life if he's raised in this non-native home and placed there. Yeah. More money or better schools or clothes or whatever. But one of the things that has been discussed and brought up is that, once these kids are taken out of those homes, their life is just crushed. And the every time the kid, let's put it this way, every time the kid looks into a mirror, he's going to know he's not white. Pure and simple. I mean, and the culture that they're being raised in is not the one that they were born to.
Yes.
And then many times these children were taunted by their schoolmates by being dark-skinned and, you try to act like a white kid, blah, blah, blah. We've probably all heard that and been through it. So that was one of the major impetus for having this law come about. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that was, again, one of the main reasons for the act was that alarmingly high number of Native children that were being removed from their homes, from their tribal families, from their tribe in general. It was just, and it was for little reasons that back in the 50s and 60s, even the early 70s, that those reasons were just, I guess we could say, petty on some of those for those removals of those Indian children. So that's why Congress passed that Indian Child Welfare Act, along with a bunch of other things that went on during that time as well.
Right. Now, Brittany, your end of the program is dealing with children there. Describe your mission, so to speak.
So, I with working in foster care, we certify, we train, and we're constantly doing outreach, trying to find families that are a member of a federally recognized tribe to come and help us out when a child is removed. We're constantly always looking for families, but our mission is to make sure that this home is maintained and following our guidelines so this Indian child can stay connected to their culture.
Now, that's an important part of what you have been charged with, is preservation of our culture and our identity, things like that. Now, do you run into situations where these kids have been taken down a different path and now kind of suffer consequences with it, not knowing who they are and whatever problems may arise from that?
Yes, and that is why our goal is to have a tribal home available, because the disruption of being removed out of their home initially, going into a new home where they have to learn new things and what's not normal, could just only add more to that disruption in their life.
Mm-hmm. And that can lead to just real dire consequences, in some case fatal. your child doesn't know who they are and decides to
Yeah, they can
terminate.
completely lose, their identity and their sense of, like you said, who they are.
And that's so important because they're going to know they're different. And, I've heard stories of kids being like that, being raised in a non-native home. Let's just call it a white home, which is majority, I presume, of what's happening. All of a sudden it hits them in the face that, that society may not be who they are and may not be fully accepting of them, despite of the advantages they may have financially and a secure home, that kind of thing. And people, I presume, would bring the argument up, well, what's wrong with that? These kids get a square meal every day, clothes, and they go to school. But they still have to deal with the fact that they're different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess you're more boots on the ground here as far as that kind of thing is concerned. Do you run into a lot of children who are in that situation? Are we facing perhaps a loss of our young people like that?
We are when we don't have enough homes. Like I said, having those native homes available to take on a placement is what could help with their loss of identity or not feeling like they're welcome or that they're different. And having those homes when their child is young enough, to go in and learn their heritage and the traditions. Once they get older, it becomes like an out of practice, and then that's where we lose our culture.
Mm-hmm.
So once having those homes and getting, the necessary training and knowledge and helping out with those cultural practices, because we do have native homes who are not so involved with their heritage and traditions because they've lost that as well.
Right.
So
right.
It's also not helping the children, but also helping our families, because everyone who has not had the privilege to know their traditions are getting to learn.
Yeah, do you have any numbers by any chance on this kind of situations, or a feel for how large that challenge may be?
That would probably be come from our unit, because with our unit, we're, again, I know our title is long, but it's state reunification and permanency. So our unit, there's a total of 5 of us. So we deal with the cases that are in state court whenever children are removed by the Department of Human Services. So it's our job to go into the state court proceedings and to make sure that the state court, the district attorney's office, and the Department of Human Services, they're all following those federal guidelines, that were laid out by the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act, as well as the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Act. So there's a bunch of guidelines and a bunch of things that they have to follow, and we, as state reunification workers, we have to make sure that they're on top of that. And, we have to make sure that we're on top of our game as well, because the biggest argument that we face in these state court proceedings is placement. And it goes back to, unfortunately, whenever a child is removed, the department, whenever they start with one placement, and that's if they find a placement that is not, we call it non-equal compliant, which means it's not in those guidelines as far as placement preferences, and they find that non-equal compliant placement. Usually that's where they stop looking. We have to remind them, because during the duration of a case, from start to finish, they're required by federal law to make those active efforts to continue to look for relative placement throughout the duration of the case. So that case, unfortunately, may go for a year, year and a half, 2 years. So even though they've placed a child, federal law tells them that they're supposed to continue to look for those relative placements. So that's the biggest argument that my staff has most of the time, is just those placements. And so we're continuously objecting during those court proceedings to those placements. So because we want to get it on record in case further on down the line there's room for an appeal. So we want to be sure to get those objections on record, that the court knows, okay, the tribe has been objecting to this placement. Why haven't we found a relative placement? So overall, that's, like I said, that's we could talk about it all day, because we get, there's a lot of moving parts in what we do. And then we've also just started our out of reservation unit, and that person, she does all the cases that are outside of our reservation throughout the state of Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And then I believe she's going to start doing out of state stuff eventually whenever we're able to get staff. So we've got 5 workers that cover our court proceedings within the reservation, and we've got 1 worker that covers all the court proceedings outside of our reservation. So we're constantly looking for staff that's going to be able to come in and help out with that. And it's, unfortunately right now it's just hard to find.
Do you either one of you have numbers? I want to go back to mm-hmm. that and kind of get a feel for how large the problem is. Perhaps the number of children that may fall into a situation where they either are or should be perhaps placed in a foster home, or the need. How many foster homes do we have? I mean,
Well, I'll give you our numbers, because it'll make sense whenever she gives you her numbers.
Right. So now, when we talk about our numbers, you're kind of dealing with the state.
Yeah, I'm dealing strictly with the state. Now, we do have numbers for our tribal unit, but like I said, I'm talking strictly when kids are in DHS custody. Mm-hmm. So right now we have 171 open cases. That means we have 171 cases that are open with Mvskoke kids involved. Out of those 171, we have 238 kids that are in DHS custody. That's just within the reservation. So, and out of that 238 right now, there is 61 that are in non-native foster homes, but that number could go anywhere up to about 70. That's including shelters, group homes, therapeutic, inpatient, AWOL, or juvenile facility. So again, total we have 238 kids just within our reservation area. Now, our 1 worker who does our out of reservation, again, you have to remember, she's doing this by herself. Mm-hmm. She has 43 open cases, and she has 70 kids that are in DHS custody outside of our reservation. So we've got a lot of kids. And again, I wanted to give those numbers because her numbers will make sense as to the need that we have within our office.
Yeah, Brittany, tell me about that need in numbers.
So we have 51 homes that have that they're certified and they do have placement. We are pretty much at max capacity. We are in the process of processing 10, so hopefully within the next month we will have a total of 61 homes, but even then, it's as soon as they open, they fill up.
Mm-hmm. When you're looking for a native home for placement, first of all, what are the guidelines that govern what you do, and what do you look for when you're perhaps assessing a home and family? I mean, what goes on there? I mean, what's the thing the deciding factors, perhaps?
So when we first receive an application, our 6 requirements are: you just have to be 21 or older. You have to live in the state of Oklahoma, because we go border to border. We don't just remain within the reservation. Mm-hmm. At least one applicant of the home has to be a member of a federally recognized tribe. So to be an open home with us, you don't have to only be Mvskoke. You have to be financially independent and pass all background checks, and then be in good health and be ready to love a child.
Do you make visits to these potential sites and kind of assess what sort of home that you may be talking about placement?
So in the beginning phase, once they do have all these requirements for us to start processing, we will do an home assessment, and then we're in the home again doing a home study. This process normally takes about 60 days, and we try to get all of our applicants open within that time frame.
In terms of human beings, I know federal guidelines require you to do A, B, C, and D, but as a person, a native woman, what kind of home are you looking for? And I know this is perhaps some personal assessment, but I think that's important in the decisions that you have to make.
For personally, I'm just looking to make sure, this is a genuine home and they are wanting to open for the right reasons and to help our Native children remain within their Native culture, and that will continue to teach them and, understanding that their mom and dad may just need some help, if they're understanding and willing to provide that while mom and dad work to get the child back in their care. That's all I'm really looking for at a personal level.
Well, that's fine. I mean, that's so critical because you're the one that has to make a decision on whether or not this placement might be followed and the kind of atmosphere this child may grow up in. Now, is it real important that, there be lots of signs of Indian culture? I mean, these people go to powwows all the time, or they may go to stomp grounds or Indian church. Those kind of things figure into what you're looking at?
They do, but like I said, a lot of us have lost that. So we also will offer that education or provide, events or anything they could do to learn or to start going to. So the child and the family, could be regaining their culture together if they didn't have that.
So on the flip side of that coin, what is it that might get a home rejected?
The biggest thing would be, the backgrounds. But as far as inside the home, if there are signs that we think, areas that we think they need help in, we do have the services to help provide to get that home in a compliance standing.
Right, and
so it's really hard to reject a home because there are several services that we can come in, and help them prepare. So if you're talking about, if it's too cluttered or if there's signs of some type of infestation, we have services to come in and help, or to teach. We provide that education, to learn how to be stable. We can teach how to budget, things like that. We just have several services we can help provide to get that home ready.
If something doesn't look quite right, you can recommend some help, and hopefully these people would be interested in obtaining that assistance and support.
There's definitely a conversation about it, and that's kind of where we assess if, they have good intentions or not.
Right. Now, the decision by the Supreme Court has been just applauded all over the nation. I mean, all of our national organizations are behind it. Our tribe has made its strong support quite visible. What about the rank and file people, though? What do you hear from them when you mentioned, the Indian Child Welfare Act has been backed up by the highest court in the land? The human element here. What kinds of things do you hear?
Well, as far as myself, I haven't heard a lot yet. But I do kind of what we was talking about before we went on air. I do, whenever I do a home visit myself, and the child is in a non-equal compliant placement, I do let the foster parent know and remind them that this is just a temporary placement. That remind them that we're as a tribal nation, we're looking for relative placement. So and again, whenever with our unit, again, that's one of those biggest arguments when we go to court is if a child is in a non-equal compliant placement, the biggest argument is, well, they're doing good there. Well, they're bonding. Well, we don't use the word bonding. But So again, we're always looking for that relative placement, and we're always having to remind the court and the department. We've got to find that those relative placements, if they are, I'll say this, if they are available. So again, there are times where the department has provided us with their diligent searches, and unfortunately, everybody that they've provided as they couldn't either pass a background check, or they've got some history or different things that's going on in their life. So we're constantly making sure that we're using. We're constantly making sure that we're using the proper legal terms when we're standing in front of a judge, to make sure that the wording or verbiage is correct, and that verbiage is put down in those court minutes.
A word like bonding, is that something that's recognized by a court? I mean, when I think of bonding, I always think of puppies. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of it, but that's the kind of thing.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at some of the courts that will just take that one word and kind of run with it. But as far as the age of a child, the child can bond with his family, with his other tribal families, just like he can bond with a non-native family. So we don't look at that word bonding when we go to court as a for sure, let's leave the child in that placement, because again, we're bound by the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act to make sure that child is in an equal compliant placement if possible. Because if we don't, then why did we need the passage of ICWA in 1978 if we're not going to do our job today? Yeah. So that's what. That's one of our, again, unfortunately, that's one of our biggest arguments whenever we do go into those court proceedings.
With the passage of the McGirt decision and the legal wrangling going on about that jurisdiction and who's in charge of what, does that something like that affect the jobs that you two are charged with now? I mean, did it change things?
It has. It's changed some for our unit, but I know it's really changed a lot for our tribal unit, because and again, if you've never been in our office, our units are split into two. Like my unit, like I said, we do our stuff in state court, but we also have a tribal unit, and they deal with all the kids that are in tribal custody, and all their cases go through our tribal court. So their numbers have really gone up as well. They've currently have 69 kids in custody, and with 39 of those open cases. So and they're actually waiting on 22 more cases to come into their unit. So they're really swamped at this time. So that decision has really affected what our office does on a daily basis as well.
Let me ask you, we're going to look at probably wrapping this up pretty soon, but a question that came up in looking at many of these cases, there would be children or young people who may be in trouble with the law for whatever reason. Whether hanging out with a gang or substance abuse or whatever other reasons. Does that affect what you all do? I mean, some kid has just been released from some sort of protective or criminal custody, perhaps. Do you have to say, goodbye, adios, we can't help you?
Well, usually those will go to our tribal juvenile justice program.
Okay.
We do have that program as well. Not in our office, but the tribe does have a tribal juvenile justice program. Now, and again, the kids that we deal with, they had to be removed and found adjudicated deprived by the court in order for us to get involved, our office as well, because unfortunately the court or the state they have three separate ways that a case can go. They have what they call a court supervision case. They have a out of home safety plan case, but then they also have our fully deprived adjudication case. Okay. And then whenever a child is adjudicated deprived, then that is when our office receives notice from the court, and then we file our motions to intervene, and then we're involved in that case.
So it's not totally write them off. There's still
exactly
some sort of avenues of release. Now, as we wrap this up, I have to ask people that I speak with in these kind of situations, like, is it hard to do? I mean, is there a personal toll, perhaps, in your home or life or personal emotional situations? I mean, is it hard to do after a while?
There's days that are hard, but there's also days that are very rewarding and remind you of why you're doing this and come to work every day. I personally would not change it, or I don't see myself working anywhere else. I do have a passion for this, and as long as we're keeping up with, self-care and setting those boundaries as best as we can from our personal life to work life, you learn how to create a balance.
Right.
And it is hard sometimes, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. And administration has been real good about promoting self-care for our office as well, because like Brittany said, it does get stressful at times. There's times that unfortunately some of our ladies are out, some of our workers are out all night, having to go pick up kids or different things like that. So administration has been really helpful as far as promoting our self-care, and so that's what we try to do whenever we're able to. But a lot of times it's when duty calls, then we answer that call. And,
certainly.
And like Brittany said, we have to have a passion for it. And I think everybody in our office does. And we do the best we can with what we have. And but like I said, we're just we do it to the best of our ability. That's for sure.
Right. And we applaud you and your strength in maintaining it and your feel for it. And is life a lot better now that the Supreme Court has backed you?
Yes, it is. And it's because I know with administration and our office, where everybody was just kind of waiting, sitting on those pins and needles and waiting on that decision to come down. And again, like I said in the beginning, and I think Chief Hill had even mentioned it with that 7-2 decision that really confirms the Supreme Court and that they stand behind the Indian Child Welfare Act. So,
okay, Brittany, what do you feel like now that the court decision's there? Is life a lot better?
It is like he said. The worry is a little gone, but the pressure is back on because now that it is upheld and is still remaining, we need our community members to step up as well. And we're here to keep ICWA intact, but to be able to do that, we need Native families to help our Native children as well.
Right. If someone is interested in helping or just wants more information, how do they get a hold of you?
You can call our CFSA office at 918-732-7869 and just ask to speak to one of our workers in the foster care unit, and we can get you an application sent out.
Okay. Steve Winnie and Brittany Candioto, we want to thank you.
Yes, sir.
1,000 Madoas for the jobs you all do.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And we hope that there'll be more wonderful developments in the field of work you do. Okay, we're going to take a pause here, and we've got the UT folks scheduled. Let's see what happens there. We appreciate you being with us here, so stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio.
I started doing it when I was 11. I wanted to be just like my big brother. And some of my friends were already doing it. We got hooked fast. I just can't get enough. I'm Jacob, and I'm addicted to playing the drums.
There's lots of stuff that makes it cool to be Native. Doing meth isn't one of them. Find something better to do. Check out ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Who am I? Am I Native? I don't want people assuming things because I'm Indian. I just want to be me. But how do I live in two worlds? Some guys just check out by doing meth. But that ain't for me. Because I see my family, my friends, my drum making, my future. There are a lot of cool things about being who I am. And meth isn't one of them.
Learn more at ncai.org. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Okay, we are hoping that our Yuchi folks show up. Sometimes this works out this way in live radio, but in the meantime, we're going to share a piece that was done earlier this year involving some of our tribal artifacts that have been placed in museums and things. And those folks in charge of that stuff are sometimes quite reluctant to return them. So let's talk about a feature here that was done in March on Mvskoke artifacts.
Okay, guys, welcome to Livewire. This is Jared Moore, and today we're going to be talking with the Mvskoke Creek Nation Historical and Cultural Preservation Department about a big win that they've just recently scored. We're going to have Turner Hunt and Raylyn Butler, who is the manager of the department, in through the Zoom chat today. And thanks for joining me today, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
So, with the, could you just give the audience like maybe a brief synopsis of what just recently happened?
Sure. Well, yesterday we had a National NAGPRA Review Committee meeting where we requested a finding of fact and cultural affiliation for the Moundville collections, Moundville and surrounding archaeological and surrounding and associated archaeological sites. And the 7 tribes that filed the joint letter presented evidence in front of the board, and the board decided that based off of a number of things that Moundville collection is in fact culturally affiliated to the Muskogean speaking tribes.
Now, originally, and just for some context for the audience, we had set this interview up a couple of weeks ago when Mr. Hunt had published an article in the paper, and the link to the article is in the description of this YouTube video if you want to go check out the November 15th issue of the Mvskoke News. And in that article, he kind of talks about some of the challenges to NAGPRA repatriations, but it also talks about the STAR organization, the Coalition of Tribes. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that was, if that was instrumental in this decision?
I'm going to let Raylyn take this one. She's much more, she's
great
head up there in the STAR Alliance.
Sure. So the STAR Alliance stands for Southeastern Tribal Alliance for Reburial and Repatriation. It is a organization that was formed within the last 2 years. It really was the goal is to facilitate repatriation and reburial in the Southeast. There are over 38,000 remains that have been dug up from our ancestral homelands in the southeastern United States. And so it's a lot of work for tribes to go through the NAGPRA process and to make claims and to get get items and ancestors returned. And so the Star Alliance was kind of a way for us to work with one another. We often found situations where museums or institutions would say, well, is this Creek or Cherokee, or is this Choctaw? And kind of putting the tribes against each other, when our goal is really repatriation and reburial, and not so much on trying to find 100% scientific proof that these ancestors belong to this tribe. And so this is a coalition of the southeastern tribes working together to facilitate and improve repatriation work.
And just real quick, while we're talking about these topics too, I want to tell all the viewers, if you guys have a question concerning repatriation or anything in the Mvskoke Creek Nation's Historic and Cultural Preservation Department, just pop it in the chat and I'll ask it. Talking about the science part of this, because I know this is something that Mr. Hunt touched on in his article, the classification of the time periods and also the kind of the archaeological or anthropological status of some of these artifacts within academia, and how that affects the attempts to try to get them repatriated. Could you guys just kind of talk about that a little bit? How is it I know there's some hindrances there. Is there any possible solution to those things, or?
Well, yeah. To kind of put this in context, so what archaeology has done, in order for them to understand time frames that are not their own, they've broken into these time categories, and they have some generalizations within these time categories of what people were doing. So say, for instance, if you're talking about Paleo-Indian, you're talking about highly mobile hunter-gatherers that hunt megafauna. If you're talking about the woodland period, you're talking about more sedentary people, but still, without the absence of corn, practicing horticulture and different domesticates. What they've done, though, is unfortunately, when the Mississippian time frame is from around 900 to around what some people say 1550 to 1600. That 1550 mark is because that's the age of exploration. DeSoto came through 1540. And so even though they were documenting Mississippian polities, towns with the names like Coosa, Tulsa, those are just two that popped off the top of my name, off of my head. Right. Those aren't modern day tribes. Those aren't, they separate them because they feel like there was such a total collapse of everything that what emerged after contact are not related to the previous people, even if they're their grandmothers or grandfathers, which to me is insulting. We look at, in the absence of historical records, you can still track the populations of people through the archaeological types of this and that and so on and so forth. And so when we know that this group was mentioned by DeSoto in 1540 as Coosa, and we know that they, where they moved through time and got to where they are, but there's archaeologists will sever that and say, well, these remains up here are much older and we can't tell exactly who they are. And that's caused problems for us. It's a bigger problem for Native Americans in general, because what it means is that the scientific community does not believe that our ancestors go back past contact. It's a very Western scientific a way of looking at things that completely negates, our views of the past. We've been here since time immemorial. This is our land. All of those concepts, they get put aside because Mvskoke Nation did not appear until after Europeans were here, or the Greek Confederacy. So those are the types of concepts that have been basically instituted in academia, history books all over the place, and they have very rarely, if ever, consulted with Native Americans. So they've never asked for, what's the Creek side of the story? What's the Cherokee side of the story? And so now we're at a point where we're looking at a lot of this stuff and we're like, there's a whole side of this history that's not there. And so we fight against it's an institutionalized body of knowledge that is not complete. It's incomplete, and we're trying to add to it, and we're finding that these obstacles come up, and it's hilarious. It's not hilarious. It's frustrating. I say that.
Right.
But the way in which they disconnect us from it, and then we're like a watered down version of our ancestors, and that negates all of the continuity that we see, all of our ceremonies, all of our our language. Our language is thousands of years old, right?
Well, and it seems strange too, because if you look at just other countries or other places where there was an evolution from an indigenous people into like a local population over thousands of years. Does that happen in other cultures, where it's like the academic world will come in and say, well, because this is the demarcation point for these two eras, right? The current people don't have any say in what happens with these remains or etc. You know what I mean? Like, is there apart from maybe, I guess you would say, does that happen in South America or, because Europe, there's long histories through there. So
I think that this is a consequence of actual having a law that focuses on repatriation, which I don't believe Europe and maybe not South America does. I think that they're in a little bit more of a controlling, it's Brazilians looking after Brazilian stuff. When we run interior in Americas, we have Americans looking at Mvskoke stuff, Americans looking at Choctaw stuff.
Right.
And so this is a completely different situation than all of those. And of course, NAGPRA has set the stage where these institutions, I'll just stop at that on that part.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too. If you're in the audience, you're watching this, you should check out Mr. Hunt's article. It goes into further depth than what we're just discussing here. But that's seems to be the problem in the nutshell. If you guys could get like a wish list of things that could be changed in NAGPRA or changed how this system operates, what would be on that list? Because I know that there are a lot of quote unquote impacts on these universities just because these research materials or these remains, that's why they don't want to give them up, is because they won't have control over where those things are. They see that as something that they've claimed for their archives, right? But what if we were in a perfect world, how could this be changed?
Well, I know that Raylan the nation has submitted some new comments on regulatory changes for NAGPRA, and I know that Raylan's a little bit more familiar with those, so if she wants to hit on that.
Yes, actually, the Department of Interior is conducting tribal consultation with all the tribes on updating new regulations for the NAGPRA law, and so they're in the process of reviewing those comments that they receive from tribes, and I think there will be even a public comment period coming up for the proposed rule changes. But it's something that has taken a decade to get to. For these proposed rule changes, we are in support of many of them because they will help streamline the NAGPRA process. But also, one of the proposed changes in particular would help us immediately with the case that we're dealing with the University of Alabama, because they have chosen not to return funerary objects. They have said that they would return the human remains, but not the belongings that were buried with them. And so the new proposed regulation would require and spell out in black and white language that human remains and funerary items must be returned when in situations where there is no cultural identity assigned to those remains. And so part of the reason, that's why we wanted to assign cultural affiliation, and all the work we've been doing with the 6 other tribes is to provide lines of evidence that shows proof that Muskogean-speaking tribes were the only people who lived in a 140-mile radius around Moundville, and that we are descendants that came from Moundville, and we all consider this to be a neutral territory that we all were a part of and came out of the mound building culture there. And so it is, there a wish list also of what things could change. Really, I think it's not necessarily for NAGPRA, but it's just for the field of archaeology. We really wish that they would stop focusing on mortuary practices or burial practices, and really that there's more to learn from the living people and culture and not from our dead, because that's what they prioritize, are these skeletons and these funerary objects as prized possessions. And it's really cultural differences and really worldview differences on how we see those things versus how they see those things. And so it's really a kind of a clash there, and will take a lot of efforts to have more tribal people go into those fields, or to have more consultation and collaboration partnerships with each other to learn and be more respectful in research moving forward.
These type of, like the funerary objects and the remains, how does the university benefit from having those in their collection? Is there a financial benefit for them directly, or why would they be?
All of the above.
I see. So
they charge admissions to go into the museum to view the objects. There's been over 200 publications, research work, articles, books published on these ancestors and their items, and 100 years of stewardship from the University of Moundville, all without consultation or any kind of notice to tribes. That means people have made their whole careers, become tenured professors. Folks have really profited off of, digging up our ancestors and studying their objects.
When the University of Alabama, like you said earlier, refuses to repatriate the funerary objects, what are their reasons for that? What is it, like they're trying to find a loophole in NAGPRA to continue to have these objects and say, well, we're going to classify them as this? Did they give you guys any rationalizations or anything for why they should be allowed to keep the objects? And whoever wants to try to field it, or if we don't know.
Some of the correspondence from the university just basically said that they don't believe that the 1011 ruling under NAGPRA law is constitutional.
So they've already gotten.
They're saying pretty much they don't even believe that NAGPRA law. Yeah.
And they assign their own value to these things as well. So,
well, just to clarify real quick. So what you guys are saying is that the NAGPRA committee has already ruled on these objects and told them to give them back. Right? Is that correct?
So okay. There's two ways to approach this. To approach kind of going at NAGPRA, and one would be through cultural affiliation, in which it is very understood that the funerary objects accompany those. When you're doing cultural affiliation, there's kind of a clause in there where it allows the institution to have discretion regarding funerary objects. And so the University of Alabama is using that to retain the funerary objects. Now, to me, I can't grasp my head around this. I find it unethical, right? Like, I've been to too many funerals recently. I know what things mean when people put it with them in their, when they're being buried.
Right.
And they see them as objects of scientific study. They see them as art pieces. I mean, I believe there's a piece in their museum that's known as the most beautiful stone, the duck bowl there. It is a beautiful piece, no doubt. But these are the things that people come to Moundville to see, to pay to go visit, to buy the books, to do all of those things. So there's a level of exploitation that's associated with this that is actually kind of on its way out with museums. More museums are moving more towards interactive and cultural centers, and it just seems like the University of Alabama is kind of back,
one of the holdouts,
back a couple of generations behind everyone else.
Well, that's troubling to hear that that's happening. So, and then you guys aren't going to be involved in legal challenges on that. Do you guys know if there is going to be a legal challenge from the tribe on it, or is that something we can't talk about at this stage?
I think that there's more steps that need to play out with current. We have the determination from the National NAGPRA Review Board, and we have a letter from the university saying that they're open to collaboration and consultation. So we're hoping that this moves forward and none of that is necessary, because like we've already dealt with a lot. We don't poisoning the well even further doesn't help anybody, because we do seek a collaborative future. We want to be proud to bring our citizens out to Moundville. We want to be happy about that experience. We don't want to have this cloud hanging over our head of 5,982 individuals in curation.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting, and I want to say to both you guys, I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. This is a very important issue for citizens, and I don't know if what the percentage of citizens are that know that this type of thing is still going on, but it's a ongoing process that could be going on forever, and it's something that really requires diligence and people looking at it all the time and fighting these particular battles. The remains that will be repatriated, can you guys just kind of talk briefly about, like, what do we do with it? How do we get it, and what do we do with it when we get it?
Well, I can help.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So the Mvskoke Nation has been doing repatriation and reburial since 1999, and NAGPRA law is 31 years old, and so really started in 1995. Is that right? I think.
Yeah, that's when 1995 is when the inventories and
the inventories were due, and so anyone who had Native American human remains or funerary objects had to send an inventory out to tribes. And so as the nation started receiving these, it really kind of spurred the creation of our department in general. To receive 1,000-page documents of here's all these ancestors. And it took a while for the nation to come up with a plan and figure out what is the best way, respectful way. And really, when it came down to talking to traditional folks in the nation, that there is no ceremonies for reburial, and we're not in the business of creating new ceremonies for those type of things, and that a lot of these ancestors predate Christianity. They predate a lot of colonial forces that were put on the nation. And so the best thing that we can do is to rebury them in a respectful way, because they did have a proper funeral when they did die, and that we're not here to try to disrupt or further do anything that may disrespect their journey, to complete their journey. And so we have participated in over 32 reburials since 1999 and have helped repatriate over 800 ancestors and over 60,000 funerary objects from 6 different states in the Southeast. And we have over 30 pending cases that we're working on, which account for almost 10,000 ancestors, including this Moundville claim and case that we're working on with the other tribes. And so that's just a little bit of background, but we plan to do respectful reburial in the state of Alabama.
Okay.
We want to thank Jared Moore for his piece there on the artifacts in Alabama. A couple of quick announcements, and we'll be out of here. Urban Agriculture Gardening Workshop is August 4th. Let's see, at the Yardika Community Center in Henrietta. And Urban Ag Container Gardening, Composting, and other programs from the Mvskoke Nation Conservation District, 732-7814. And you want to get back to them because they've got a dinner there, so you might want to check it out. Okay, 8th Annual Mvskoke Spelling Bee Competition with prizes coming up on Saturday, September 16th. One age category from 10 to 3 at the Eufaula Community Center in Eufaula, sponsored by the Eufaula Canadian Tribal Town. Lunch will be provided, and for more information, study guides, or a copy of the rules, contact 732-7725. But You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. But